Hey there. My workshop remodel is coming along nicely, and as I move along, what I'm trying to do is come up with better organization methods than I had before. I noticed that the center of my workspace is normally my table saw, and it tends to collect things. And there's also things that I tend to leave on my table saw because I use them a lot there. And as you can see here, I've got my table saw cleaned off, but these are items that I just always use at my table saw. I have my remote for my dust collector, which I normally keep in my pocket, but I just tend to store it here because the table saw is one of the tools I use the most. I also have my air filter remote, a couple of pencils, notepad, have a little square here, my double square. I've got a couple of push blocks, tape measure, some adjustments. This is for my miter guide and some eye protection. And I think that's it. But then it also just tends to collect things depending on the project that I'm working on. So what I want to do is, I a lot of times just keep it up here on the fence, but obviously that's not large enough now, and then a lot of times it just kind of ends up getting in the way. So what I want to create is just a little space that connects onto the fence here, a little tray that can slide back and forth, is easily removed. I can move it somewhere else if I need any of those tools, but just to store that here, and so it can just be part of my workspace. So I think I'm just going to build that out of plywood. So let's go ahead and get some wood and get started.
I had some scrap 3/4 inch plywood in my shop that I will use to build the tray. First I am ripping a small piece of plywood to sit on top of the fence and act as a hook. Then I rip a piece of plywood that will sit against the back side of the fence and support the tray. I drill pilot holes in the scrap piece of plywood that will act as the tray. Next I clamp and screw the hook piece to the edge of the tray. I then set the support piece against the fence and mark where it will sit on the underside of the tray. I drill holes through the back, then follow up in the front to countersink. I clamp the support piece to the fence and set the tray with the hook on top so that it is flush and tight, then drill pilot holes. I fasten the support piece to the tray with screws. I then test for fit, and it fits snugly and holds in place like a French cleat. I wanted a bit of additional support, so I mark out places for magnets. Magnets are probably unnecessary, but over-engineering is sometimes part of the hobby. I removed the hook piece and hogged out a recess for each magnet with the miter gauge. I used a chisel to clean things up. I'm not sure where the clip went, but I used epoxy to glue the magnets on the hook piece. I decided I wanted the tray to be a bit more narrow, so I ripped it down to size. Then I screwed the hook piece back onto the tray. I wanted rails for the tray, so I cut a few pieces of 1/4 inch plywood. I chopped the rails to length with a miter gauge. A little glue and 23 gauge tacks attached the rails to the tray. The rails on the underside of the tray needed a trim, so I used a saw and razor to create a channel.
So I've waited a couple of days for the epoxy on the magnets here to dry, and we are all set to test this out. Nice, sits perfectly in place there, and those magnets really make a difference. So I basically got a French cleat set up here, and that was working pretty good, but with these magnets, it's really sitting there tight, so that's a great fit. Let's see here. Throw my pencils on there, some of my remotes, push blocks. I don't use these very often. Tape measure. So yeah, and there's still a little bit of extra room here if I have other things. So if I have anything else here and I'm doing setup, or I have specialized cuts that I'm making on my table saw, this should really make a difference, and it really slides back and forth, and things are easy to grab. Throw on my eye protection. So I'm pretty happy with this. This turned out exactly like I wanted, and it's more of a proof of concept too. I suppose as I use it, I could always make additional modifications, and then I could also make a much nicer one if I wanted to. out of nicer wood. So hopefully this is useful for anyone that also has a lot of items they tend to keep on their table saw, and leave some comments in the comments section. Thanks.